The moment humanity built its first walls, it also built its first enemies. More than 4,000 years ago, in the land of Mesopotamia, the world's first cities rose from the desert. They promised safety, order, and progress. But they also created borders, pride, and rivalry. Two powerful Sumerian city-states, Lagash and Umma, soon collided in a struggle over land, wealth, and the favor of the gods. What followed became the first recorded war in human history. This is the Sumerian Saga, history's first war. In the heart of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians built something the world had never seen before. Cities. Not villages of mud huts, but sprawling centers of trade, temples, and politics. Uruk, Lagash, and Umma rose like islands of stone and clay in a sea of desert. For the first time, people lived behind walls. They gathered in crowded streets, worked fields that stretched far beyond the horizon, and bowed before towering temples that touched the sky. These cities became engines of power, each with its own gods, its own rulers, and its own ambitions. But prosperity came at a price. The land of Sumer was fertile but limited. Each city depended on canals and irrigation carved from the earth. Control the water, and you controlled life itself. And it was here, in these narrow strips of farmland, that rivalry first took root. The story of Sumer was not only the story of invention and progress, it was the story of humanity's first struggle for dominance. To the Sumerians, the gods were not distant figures. They walked among men. They controlled storms, harvests, and the floods of the great rivers. Every city believed it was protected by its own divine patron, and every temple was a throne for that god on earth. In Lagash, the god Ningirsu was worshipped as a fierce warrior, a protector of order and victory. In Umma, the people turned to Shara, a god of valor and strength. These weren't just spiritual beliefs. They were weapons of authority. Kings claimed their right to rule through the favor of the gods, and priests guarded that bond with rituals carved into clay tablets and stone. When cities fought, it was never seen as ruler against ruler. It was God against God. Every battle was a sacred contest, every victory a sign of divine approval. So when Lagash and Umma began to quarrel over land, it was not just soil that was at stake. To the Sumerians, it was the will of heaven itself. Between Lagash and Umma stretched a strip of fertile ground, rich with grain and watered by canals. For centuries, it was a prize both cities desired, because in Sumer, farmland was survival. Whoever controlled the fields controlled food, wealth, and power. But the boundaries between the two cities were unclear. Irrigation canals often shifted, and new dikes carved the land in different ways. Soon disputes began. Farmers from Umma crossed into Lagash's territory to till the soil. Lagash accused Umma of stealing what was rightfully theirs. The tension grew. At first, it was argued in words and entreaties, agreements carved into clay, overseen by priests. But words and rituals could not hold back ambition. The kings of Umma wanted the land. The rulers of Lagash swore to defend it. And so, what began as a quarrel over fields of barley became the spark that lit the first recorded war in human history. At the heart of this conflict stood two rulers. From Lagash came Eannatum, a king remembered as fierce, ambitious, and relentless. He was not just a leader. He was a warrior who marched with his soldiers, driven by the belief that his god, Ningirsu, had chosen him to defend Lagash and expand its power. In Umma, rival kings rose with equal determination. They claimed the disputed lands as their own, calling on their people to fight for Shara, their city's patron god. Each side saw themselves as rightful heirs to the fields, and each believed the god stood with them. This was more than a fight for territory. It was a battle of pride, honor, and destiny. For kings in Sumer, victory meant more than survival. It meant proof that their god was stronger, their city greater, their name eternal. And so, two men and two cities became locked in a struggle that would mark the birth of organized war. War in Sumer was unlike anything the world had seen before. No longer was conflict just a raid between villages or a skirmish of hunters. This was organized, disciplined, and deliberate. Armies of Lagash and Umma marched in tight formations. Soldiers carried spears, axes, and curved blades of bronze. They wore helmets made of copper and cloaks of leather, their shields locked together as they advanced. For the first time in history, war had rules, ranks, and strategy. Behind the infantry came chariots, primitive by later standards, but revolutionary for their age. Pulled by donkeys, they carried warriors into battle at terrifying speed, crashing through enemy lines. This was not just men fighting men, it was the birth of military systems that would echo across centuries. For the Sumerians, war had become a machine, and once built, it could not be stopped. The armies of Lagash and Umma finally met on the contested plain. Dust rose from the ground as thousands of feet marched in unison, spears glinting beneath the burning Mesopotamian sun. This was no ambush, no raid in the night. It was battle on a scale the world had never witnessed before. Eannatum of Lagash led his soldiers from the front. Inscribed records tell us he invoked the god Ningirsu, promising victory through divine will. His men advanced in tight ranks, shields interlocked, their formation like a moving wall of bronze and wood. Across the field, the warriors of Umma charged, their own priests calling down the power of Shara. The two lines collided with a sound that must have shaken the earth, shields cracking, spears breaking, men shouting as chaos swallowed the plain. This was humanity's first glimpse of organized slaughter. And though the records were carved by Lagash, one thing is clear: the day belonged to Eannatum. Eannatum wanted the world to remember his victory, not as rumor, but as fact carved in stone. From this desire came one of history's most haunting monuments, the Stele of the Vultures. This massive slab of limestone, broken but still surviving today, tells the story of the war in grim detail. On one side, soldiers of Lagash march in formation, their spears driving into fallen enemies. On another, vultures circle overhead, carrying away the severed heads of the defeated. It is not just a record of triumph, it is a warning. The Stele shows Eannatum himself, larger than life, leading his men into battle under the gaze of the god Ningirsu. In one carving, the god is shown holding enemies in a giant net, handing them over to the king for slaughter. This was more than art. It was propaganda. The Stele declared to all of Sumer that Lagash had the favor of heaven, that their king was chosen, and that defiance would lead only to death. The world's first war had now given rise to the world's first war monument. Victory came at a heavy price. The fertile fields between Lagash and Umma, once green with barley, were scarred by battle. Irrigation canals ran red, not with water, but with the blood of those who had fought for them. Farmers who once tilled the soil, now buried their dead in it. For the people of Umma, defeat meant more than loss of land. Their king was forced to swear oaths of submission, paying heavy tribute to Lagash. What had once been a lifeline of food now became a burden of debt. Even in Lagash, where Eannatum claimed victory, the cost was felt. To feed an army and rebuild after war strained the city's strength. Soldiers returned scarred, families mourned, and the shadow of vengeance lingered in every home. This was the lesson of the world's first recorded war. No matter who won, the land bore scars, and the people carried grief. For Eannatum, the war was only the beginning. Riding on his victory, he expanded Lagash's power far beyond its borders. One by one, neighboring cities bowed to his authority. Through conquest, alliances, and fear, he built what many historians consider the first empire in human history. Yet his legacy was not carved only in stone. Eannatum showed future kings the blueprint of power: control the land, claim the god's favor, and use war as a tool of expansion. His victories echoed for generations, inspiring rulers from Akkad to Babylon and beyond. But his reign also revealed the fragility of empire. After his death, the unity he forged began to crumble. Old rivalries resurfaced, and the cities of Sumer returned to their endless struggle for dominance. The war between Lagash and Umma was more than a clash of kings. It was a turning point in human history. For the first time, war was not a raid or a feud, it was organized, remembered, and recorded. It showed that once people built cities, they also built armies, and once they fought for land, they would never stop. The Stele of the Vultures still stands as a reminder. It is not just a monument to victory, it is a warning carved in stone, telling us that civilization and conflict were born together. The Sumerian Saga is the beginning of a story that continues even today. From those first walls and fields came empires, nations, and wars that would shape the world. Humanity's first war was not the last. It was the first chapter in an unbroken chain that still defines us.